When it comes to protecting our data, we need to be able to protect it from all potential access paths to the data. And when we're working in enterprise databases, is we have a multitude of different types of users who are getting different types of access to different portions of our data within our database. Now, when we start looking at your typical application tier, we kind of think of, well, we need to put a firewall that can actually monitor what's being run against the database and look at those different commands, and being able to then look at what's allowed and what's not allowed. Now, because we can have all of these other people accessing the database, one of the things that would be kind of nice to be able to do is kind of take that same kind of concept of the firewall out, maybe on the application tier or elsewhere, and being able to kind of include that or something like that within the database. So it isn't just looking at what's coming through our applications. We can now look at all of these other types of people that are accessing the database. So with the database firewall, it allows us to be able to do that, taking those same concepts. So we're getting to see some databases that are doing this. So it's not defined to any particular applications. It's not necessarily defined to particular schemas. We can do it on the database as a whole, or maybe individual schemas. And what it allows us to do is look at what are those kind of SQL commands that are being run, what kind of functions, APIs are being run against our data, and then being able to work out, well, what should people be allowed to do or not? And we can create different, basically, allow lists on what we can do. Now, we can do things at a very fine level or more at a high level stuff. So what we can say is, we can even go down to restricting that only commands can run against, say, a particular schema or particular objects that come from a particular IP address or from a certain application or from a certain open operating system user. Or we can say is, certain commands just on the schema on it. So we have lots of different controls that we can actually place on individual components within our schema and at the kind of the different levels as we build out towards maybe the entire database. Now, within the SQL firewall is we have a few commands to set up the admin side of things, and also being able to capture it and being able to manage it. So we're going to switch over in a moment to looking at some SQL scripts that we can actually run to be able to help us to do this. And then the SQL script that I'm using will be available as a link within the video description. So you'll be able to get your hands on that. And I also have a blog post that goes through it in a little bit more detail as well. So let's switch over to looking at the demo. Okay, so here we are in a terminal window, and we can just use any SQL tool that we want, like say SQL Developer, VS Code. I'm just going to use SQL command line here. On the left hand side, I have the script, the demo script for being able to run SQL Firewall. And what we're going to do is we're just going to run through this, right? So, I'm going to let the script run and we can follow what it is. And then we can step into this file from time to time just to see a little bit clearer what are some of the commands that are being run. Okay. Now, the first few commands that I have here is really just, it does a cleanup. Okay. So just ensure that we have a clean environment. So if you're running this for the first time, you may get some errors and stuff like that. The next few lines are actually commented out. Right. So if this is your first time to run this script, you want to uncomment these two lines. Okay, so this is where you need to log in as sys, which is like a super user, and you need to grant the SQL firewall admin to the system, which is like root, like in Linux, user, which is your administrator user. Once you've done that, you don't have to do that again. That's kind of a one-time only kind of thing. And then we can connect into our system schema. We can enable the firewall. We can start doing some captures. We can log into our Scott schema and do some queries in relation to that. So let's give this a spin. So let's just connect into the database. Just have the command here. Let's just copy and paste it. Okay, so there we are connected to the database, and I'm using 23.7 for this particular example. So anything older than that will also work. So let's fire up the script, right? So we'll be able to see what it does. So it's going to connect in. It's going to do a few different kind of tasks on that, and I've set the term off because we're probably going to get some error messages because this kind of stuff has already been done already. Okay, so it's gone through all of those, and now what we're going to do is we're going to enable the SQL firewall. So we'll get to see the command over here. All right, so we'll just move that up so we can see it in parallel. And then what we're going to do is we're going to turn on the capture. So we're turning it on as the administrator of the database. Next, we're going to connect to the Scott Tiger schema and just run some commands. So it's a few very simple kind of commands on that. So we can run it against our department, we can run it against our employee table, and then we can do some filtering in relation to that. Okay, so we've run some commands and we're saying, well, okay, these commands have been captured, what can we actually do with it? So the next thing we need to do is we need to turn off the capture and being able to see what the SQL firewall has been able to capture in relation to that, and what we can actually monitor to see what was run. So with there, we've stopped the capture, right, which is good. So let's run some queries. So when we kind of run this, what we get is a few different things kind of coming out. Now, in the vast majority of cases, what we're going to get is we may get some hidden kind of sessions behind the scenes. So sometimes the commands the tools are using might actually run a few extra ones, but what we can see is here's the kind of the 3 commands that we've actually been able to go and run, which is kind of needed. And most of these other ones are actually they're just basic commands that maybe the tool that you're running is actually running. That's all it needs to do. So we're kind of good in that. So what we're kind of say is, well, what, those commands, they're all okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an allowed list for Scott using that particular list. Okay, so what we're going to do is we've enabled the list so we can go and actually process it. But some of the things we can also do, we can also look about some of the details to do with what is allowed. So we can see user Scott, someone logging in as Scott, what IP address, because we're running locally, it's going to be that. We can also see what tool is being used, so we can see a SQL command line is being used. And what else we can see is that, well, the operating system, that's me. So that's me out in my laptop kind of aspects of that. And then what we can do is, here's the different kind of commands that have been run, and we get to see the commands that we were allowed to run. That just skipped on. So we get to see the commands that we actually did run, and also the kind of some of the background process ones. So in order to test to see if that firewall is being enabled, so can we actually do the same things, is that we log back into our Scott schema, we run, say, the 3 commands again, but next what we're going to do is we're going to run a very different command, right? So in this particular case is we're going to run select count from department, and what we get is we get some information kind of coming out. Okay, so we'll get some details kind of coming out saying things like SQL firewall violation and stuff like that. Now, sometimes when I run this, I get different levels of information kind of coming out, but it's usually this one particular command that's actually there, right? That's in violation of it. Sometimes I've just gotten something like that. Sometimes I get this entirety kind of being coming out. Okay, so that's an example of being able to protect what commands are being run against particular tables within our schema in relation to that. So once we're finished that, then one of the things we can do is we can maybe log back into our system. So this is when we log back in, we can actually see what the violation has been. So we can see what the command that has been there, we can see what's blocked it, and some other the information that's been around, was the IP address, time, we can see what the user was, and we can get other kind of information out from that. And with that, we kind of come to the end of our demo script. So what we can do is we can turn things off and we'll delete things. But one of the things we could also do is that, by looking at the commands that have been kind of blocked or kind of through our violation list, what we could say is, hey, we can add those to the allowed list. So the next time we log in, they're actually going to be there true. So there's our quick little demo of using SQL FireWall. Now, there's a lot more that can be done with it, but we'll see if we can get another kind of video together to be able to demonstrate some of those features.